Aloha. Welcome to the first general membership meeting of the Kihei Community Association for the new year 2021. And we say Happy New Year to everyone because this is our first official act for a public act for the new year. My name is Mike Moran, president of the KCA, and we welcome our members and our community, as well as our three guests for this evening. Just a few opening announcements. First, as most of you know, we've had a continuous food bank drive for probably a decade, but since we've gone virtual, we can ask people coming to the meeting to bring donations for the food bank. So we just ask our community, we all know what a year this has been, and the great need, probably the greatest need since the Maui Food Bank has been established. So you can't bring stuff to our public meetings, but there are plenty of places to drop off. Go to the Maui Food Bank website and it will give you a list of regional spots where you can donate, or you can donate right at their facility in Wailuku. So please remember our food bank. Second announcement is membership. Likewise, many of our long-term members always came and renewed at a live meeting. Well, of course, we haven't had live meetings in a long time. So we ask our members, please still keep renewing your membership. We're going on virtual and probably will be for some time, but please check your membership and renew it. And some of you folks who have been participating and are not members, please consider joining. You can go to, everything is on our website, gokihei.org. You can join from there. You can get everything from there. Our third announcement is we're required by our bylaws to announce the officers for the new year. Members, remember that you voted for the board of directors at our November meeting, and we announced them who the entire new board was, and then the board at their first meeting in January elects the 4 officers. And depending on your point of view, this may be one of those things where insanity, if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. We have the same 4 officers again. So yes, I am back again, guys. Sorry. We're trying to get term limits put in a KCA, but it hasn't happened so far. So yes, I will be your president once again. Our wizard of tech and so many other things, Rob Weltman, will be our vice president. And Patricia Stillwell doesn't have enough to do in her life that she is, again, the treasurer as well as the secretary. So easy to remember, it's the same 4 officers. So now we have officially done that, and we can move on to the important parts of the meeting. We're concentrating for the first time probably ever. We're 61 years old, so maybe it happened once before, but this is, in most of our memories, the first time we concentrated on the state. Everybody calls it the LUC, which means Land Use
Level of professionalism, and try to limit some of the cronyism that happens in our government at this time, and also the expense of the turnover. Because the information, the research that we were doing was showing that you can save, that the turnover will cost you about 1.5 times the position.
Andrew, you need to mute.
Turning those positions over, training new people, getting.
Oh, okay, there we go. That was, anybody doesn't know that voice, that's our South Maui County Council member, Kelly King, who has been part of, a strong supporter for KCA for a long time. So she was talking about something a little bit different, not the LUC, but it's all good stuff when it's coming out of Kelly King's mouth. So, technology, welcome to technology. Sometimes we have hiccups, but the Land Use Commission, they decide how land is going to be used. Now we can wrap up the meeting and say, well, that's what they do. They decide how land will be used, but I think you want to hear more detail than that. And we're very fortunate to have the current chair of the Land Use Commission, Jonathan Schurer, will be our first presenter coming up. And we'll also have a couple of frequent contributors to KCA, Mark Hyde, who is a past vice president and a continuing member, and Professor Dick Mayer, who he has his own KCA up country, so he doesn't have to be a member down here, but Dick has been a frequent contributor to so many things. So we're most fortunate to have these three guys here tonight. And so I will stop talking and let Jonathan kick things off tonight. Jonathan, welcome. From the big island, big population island of Oahu. Take it away, Jonathan.
Aloha, Mike, and aloha, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to actually spend time with you all. So Mike asked me to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes about 4 basic things, though I'm going to give you 5. One is what the LUC is. The second is what we do. The third and the fourth were why I volunteered to be a member and then be the chair. And then I'm just going to use this opportunity to talk a little bit about some critical issues that I think are going to come up at the legislature, because they come up every year at the legislature regarding the Land Use Commission. So real briefly, I was born and raised on Oahu. I have too many degrees, a bachelor's, master's, and a doctorate, all in environmental studies. I wrote my doctoral dissertation about the way scientific information and Native Hawaiian claims were treated by the State Water Commission, a sister commission, and by the Hawaii Supreme Court. And I've been honored. I'm now starting the 7th of 8 possible years on the LUC. My term ends in July or June 30th of 2022. But it's been an amazing experience, particularly when I've gotten to work with great and well-organized communities around the islands. So with that, my first question, I guess the last thing I'll say is that while I was born and raised on the most populous island, which many of you like to tease and say we never want to be like Oahu, I did have the good fortune of spending most of my summers in Haiku on Maui, spending time with friends who lived over there. And so I feel very close to Maui in many ways for that youthful experience in Haiku and upcountry, as well as over many years working particularly in the Navaeha area in West Maui on water issues. So anyway, with that, first question is, what is the LUC? Real simple, the LUC was created by the state legislature in 1961, and we are a creature unlike any other in the United States. The power to zone land, to control what kinds of uses go on land, is a power that is not held by the federal government. It's given to the states under the reserved powers doctrine of the Constitution. And most other states have basically immediately delegated those powers to counties or cities or villages or parishes, depending on how their states are organized at the local governmental level. Hawaii, because of its late entry into the Union, took a step back when it was framing its constitution and when it was framing its initial laws, and said, we don't want to actually delegate all of the land use powers that are held by the state government to local government. We actually want to withhold some of those powers at the state level. And so to implement a state land use law, the Land Use Commission and the land use law was passed in 1961 initially. And it established first 3, now 4 land use districts. So all land in Hawaii is contained in one of 4 districts: the urban district, the rural district, the agricultural district, or conservation district. And about 95% of the state is either in the conservation or ag district. Only 5% of the state is in the urban district. Areas in the urban district where most of us live, our zoning on that level is controlled by the counties. But to move land from the agricultural district or the conservation district is primarily one of the primary duties of the Land Use Commission. There's 9 of us that can be appointed. We're all appointed by the governor and confirmed by the state senate. So everybody has the opportunity. If you think that the Land Use Commission is doing a poor job, we are subject to confirmation process. You can testify against us. You can testify in favor of us if you want. You can, in addition to testifying at our meetings, you can testify during the Senate confirmation process. You can look at our financial disclosures. We are one of the important state boards where our members actually, our individual financial disclosures are made public, and you can review those. There's 9 of us, 4 of us are appointed as representatives from the 4 counties, well, the 4 large counties. Most people forget there's actually 5 counties in Hawaii, Kalawao being its own county, Kalaupapa. But the 4 counties, Kauai, Oahu, Honolulu, Maui, and Hawaii. And then there's 5 members at large. One of the 5 members, one of the 9 members in addition, is supposed to be somebody with extensive experience in traditional and customary Native Hawaiian practices. And so that's kind of the basics of who the Land Use Commission is. What do we do? There's about 6 main things that we do. The one that gets most of the attention is called a District Boundary Amendment, or a DBA. And that's what I referenced really briefly before, moving land from the conservation or agricultural district into the urban district. Most recently on Maui, the largest move that the Land Use Commission did was for Waikapu Country Town, the Mike Atherton development that's going to provide about 3,000 homes, almost entirely in the affordable to local market rate category, in addition to some commercial areas. And in addition, that developer out of his land holdings is setting aside over 800 acres as permanently set aside for in a conservation easement for agriculture. That's the biggest thing we do. That's what we're known for. If you read the book Land and Power by George Cooper and Gavin Dawes, that's the one that they delved into extensively. The Land Use Commission for years was known in many ways as a rubber stamp for development in Hawaii. Simply coming with whatever land use proposals that developers wanted and agreeing to them, and then moving those lands into the urban district. The Land Use Commission today is quite different than it was back in those days. And there have been times over the Land Use Commission's history where the Land Use Commission has taken difficult stands on development issues. Another thing that we do, we look at special use permits. So a special permit is when you have a use, for instance, in the agricultural district that's not a normal use of land in the agricultural district, for instance, a landfill. If that land use is larger than 15 acres, the local county planning commission will review that permit, but they then send it up for a final decision to the Land Use Commission. So we do special permits. We do a third thing called declaratory rulings. People ask us to interpret our statute or other statutes in relationship to particular facts. We've done a number of those on Maui recently in the last few years. We take up motions. Oftentimes these are motions for people who want us to revisit conditions of a land use district boundary amendment. So the land use district boundary amendment that moved the land from the agricultural district into the urban district for Kihei High School, the Department of Education has been coming to us with a proposed motion to amend that condition. We take up status reports from folks who are in the development process, and they report to us on how they're complying with the conditions that were placed during the district boundary amendment. And in addition, we're also put in charge of the important agricultural lands designation process, which is an odd duck I'm happy to answer during questions and answers. It's a poorly designed law, in my opinion, that does little to protect agricultural land or actually support agriculture in Hawaii, but we're in charge of it. So those are the big things that we do. Mike's third and fourth questions were, why did I volunteer and why did I volunteer to become the chair? I'll take the second one first. Being the chair of the Land Use Commission isn't by appointment by the governor. You're elected by your fellow members. After I had been on the commission for a while, I was interested in helping to run meetings, and I had served as the vice chair for a number of years, and I was really honored by my fellow commissioners who chose to elect me. It's generally done every year. We take a vote unless people are okay with keeping leadership there. So people have sometimes served for brief periods. Sometimes people have served for long periods over the course of the LUC's history. Why did I decide to serve overall? It's a good and challenging question. I would say much of my career, my private life, I work as a consultant in managing environmental conflict. People who are fighting over water rights or natural resources. And I don't think there's an aspect of sustainability in Hawaii, an aspect of helping both our land and our people be prosperous that doesn't involve, on some level, land use. So that was why I was interested. I had served 3 years on the Oahu Island Burial Council as one of 2 members of the Konomoku, representing the Konomoku on Oahu, and I had been involved in development issues on that level. And because of a change in the law, I wasn't able to be reappointed to that, and I was interested and was fortunate enough to be first appointed by Governor Abercrombie to the position. The last thing I was going to mention, and then I'm going to hand it back to Mike. Every year, I feel very strongly that the Land Use Commission has been really important for Hawaii. There's places in the United States, such as Houston, that have no zoning at all. There's a lot of places that have zoning only at the local level, most places. Some of the most rampant development and many would say overdevelopment has occurred in places without strong land use controls. Not that Hawaii is perfect, not that we have a lot that we couldn't do better, not that we don't have certain crises around housing and other things that have land use as a critical aspect to them. But I think Hawaii without the Land Use Commission would be a very, very different place than it was. And if we can make good and representative and wise decisions about how we use land in Hawaii at a statewide level, a little bit insulated from politics and donors, that would be good. But every year, various entities introduce bills to either eliminate the Land Use Commission or say that, no, the county should be in charge of zoning, all zoning under 100 acres in size. I've resolutely sort of opposed and encouraged opposition to those bills because in many ways they're trying to solve problems that those solutions would not solve. So I'm happy to talk about those things too. Mike, you're on. Have I overgone my time?
Not at all, Jonathan. Those were kind of minimum guides for time. So I've attended many meetings. I've tried to learn about it. Your clerk Riley has been schooling me for years. But no, Jonathan, if you want to continue, you can certainly you can go on and talk about.
I'm really eager to hear from Dick and Mark and get to Q&A from the members and hear other voices. I guess the last thing I'll say is that when the Land Use Commission works best, we have a fantastic staff. We have 8 of 9 members. We have 1 vacancy right now. I really serve with an incredible group of people. I have to say they're all very thoughtful. They give very generously of their time, and we fight, we disagree, we debate over issues. We don't all go in the same direction. And I think it's sort of exactly what was intended with the law. But the best discussions we have, and this is, I'm not trying to kiss up to the KCA, but the best discussions we have is when the community is well organized, vocal, and articulate about what's important to them. Those are the times that we, I think, really are able to take a statewide view, but listen to local concerns and make good decisions. And so it really takes everybody working together. As they say, it's a kako thing. So that's one of the reasons why I'm like super happy to take a little time away from my family this evening and spend it with you all instead. Mahalo.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. And right back at you, I agree with you from the outside that I think that that's such a terrific team. And just as you said, it's not, okay, we're all unified here. Now there's a disagreement and there's a different point of view, but everybody is civil, gets along, and treats the community extremely well. Those of us that participate with other volunteer, and I like to emphasize that you and your whole commission are all volunteers that are, when it was active, you were flying around to the different islands, but even now you're spending time, and everybody treats the testifiers and the participants extremely well. And that is not happening at other boards and commissions. We still appreciate people volunteering, but we're volunteering too, guys. So maybe a little self-respect going back and forth. Okay, thank you, Jonathan. And yes, there'll be plenty of time for you to do more. But I see Dick Mayer is saying, when the heck do I get to talk around here? So Dick, would you take it away, please?
I will do that. Thank you. And aloha to everybody in the South Maui community and beyond. A little background on myself. Many of you know that I taught at the community college here on Maui for 34 years, retired. I've been very active in a lot of planning issues on Maui. I was on the Planning Commission. I was also on the General Plan Advisory Committee that put together the Maui Island Plan. I was the vice chair of that. I've been also on community plan advisory committees up country where I live in Kula, and was vice chair of that. So I've had quite a bit of involvement, and what I'd like to do today is to sort of relate land use issues and planning issues on Maui. Presently, I'm coordinator for the alliance of all the community associations on Maui. We haven't met this year because of the COVID, but I hope to get back to our regular meetings, which were very, very interesting. What I want to do is to share a screen, and let's see if I can get that going, and then go on from there. You won't see much of me, but hopefully you'll see a shared screen. Let's see if I can get that going. There you go. Can you see it? Is it on? Hello? I presume. Can you hear me?
Yes, can see and hear.
Okay, very good. Okay, what I want to do is talk about land use decision making, and not just the Land Use Commission, but I'd like to put the Land Use Commission in a context of all land use planning on Maui. And what I want to start off with is just the idea that when people talk about land use and land use planning, we have an initial sort of a basis upon which to discuss this. We have a conflict, or not always a conflict, but a tension between the person who owns a piece of land and the community at large. The person who owns a piece of land probably wants to make the best use of it, the one that's going to give them the greatest return, highest financing. They may even bring in an outside investor to help do that, and that oftentimes is the case here on Maui. And on the other hand, we have the community and their interests. And so we have to have boards and commissions and bodies to decide whether we should favor the landowner and developer on the one hand, or the community and the neighbors who live near that piece of land. Now, a new development may have one or two or even more entitlements, but in order for the project to be built, it must have all of its entitlements. It must meet all of the conditions that were imposed during the entitlement process. What this means is that if I'm an owner of a piece of land and I want to build something on that, a hotel or a store or whatever it might be, or a subdivision of housing, I can't just go ahead and do it. I have to go to get permission to get an entitlement. And there are various kinds of entitlements. We'll go through those in a minute. And without those entitlements, I will not be able to do it. It's not like going to one board. Very often you'll have to go to 2, 3, 4 different boards to do that. So for example, the most common situation is that you may need 5 entitlements. You'll need to go to Jonathan's State Land Use Commission, where you'll get your land classified as urban, rural. Usually you'll want to go from agriculture to urban or agriculture to rural, so you can develop. You'll need to be within the urban or rural growth boundaries that are designated within the Maui Island Plan. Then you'll have to get conformance with the community plan. In the case of South Maui, the most recent one is the 1998 Kihei Mckenna Plan. And now in the next 2 years, you will be putting together your new community plan. And hopefully by 2023 or so, you'll have a new community plan for South Maui that will indicate an update and what you think should be happening there. And finally, once you get a community plan, you'll have to get zoning. So in other words, the community plan may say this area should be a residential, but what kind of residential could that mean? It could mean apartment houses, multi-story buildings, it could be single family, duplexes. So there's different kinds of zoning that you would get. And if it's close to the ocean, you may also need shoreline management areas. So to put the Land Use Commission in context, it's really only the first step in what might be a long process to get the rights to develop your land. One of the other things that gets infused into all of this is environmental reviews. Hawaii has a law, 343, that tells everybody if in certain situations, if you meet criteria, you have to get an environmental assessment. And you look at a whole bunch of different criteria. And if you can show that there are really no significant impacts, you'll be issued something called a FONSI. And it's written sometimes as a FONSI or a FONSI or a FONSI. And that means that there are findings of no significant impact, in which case you're clear, you can go ahead. But if there are significant impacts, you will probably need to get an environmental impact statement, which is much more comprehensive and needs much more review. And those are things which the community can challenge if they feel it hasn't been done properly. The question will be, are there negative impacts from that project? That's what the EIS would have to show. And how will the impacts be mitigated? If they cannot be mitigated, then probably the EIS will kill the project. In other words, it shows that it cannot be done. The problem here, though, is that most of the EIS documents are written by the developer themselves, and they very often are being approved by the person actually in favor of the project. And that's a problem in Hawaii that we have not yet been able to get around. This is just a brief list of some of the criteria and some of the impacts that would have to be looked at in the EIS process. Jonathan went through this with the State Land Use Commission. I'm not going to go through it again, just that he made it clear that there are 4 categories: urban, rural, ag, and conservation. Keep in mind that the conservation district is something that's run not by the LUC so much as it is by the Department of Land and Natural Resources. Also very important is if the parcel of land is under 15 acres, Maui County handles it. If it's over 15 acres, it goes directly to the Land Use Commission. And that's what, when Jonathan mentioned the Waikapu situation, that was a large project and it was over 15, so the LUC handled it. Another one they handled was the Oluwalu situation several years ago. The urban district is, as you would expect, city-like concentrations. The rural is usually country type settings with some farming and half acre lot minimums. Then there's also the agricultural district and the conservation district, each one having their own characteristics and elements to them. The LUC's job is to decide what the land should be. It's important to remember that back when the law was first passed in 1961, the LUC went ahead and placed all the lands in Hawaii in one of the 4 districts. And these 4 districts have maintained themselves in most cases all the way through. What the discussion is always at with the State Land Use Commission is, does a piece of the land that's, let's say, in agriculture or conservation get shifted to make it more urban? And does it meet the criteria to be urban? Is it needed to be urban? Will it benefit the community if it's urban, or shall it remain agricultural or conservation? The Land Use Commission may approve a project, approve it with conditions, or deny the petition. And if it's amended with conditions, these conditions must be recorded and become very important part of the whole process. And the public should be aware of what the conditions are on the land. An important one is your Kihei High School, where the Land Use Commission said there must be either an overpass or an underpass on Pi'ilani Highway so students can safely get to school. That was a condition, and there's been a lot of discussion in your Kihei Community Association about how that is going to be met. The State Department of Transportation didn't like either of those ideas and is now trying to get a roundabout built on the highway. Whether that's going to be a safe way to get across, whether that's going to interfere with traffic too much, those are still issues that have to be dealt with. But conditions become the important tool by which you can take a project that might otherwise be bad and perhaps make it acceptable. Or a good project can be improved. What does the LUC consider when it does its things? And I looking at the items in yellow: important natural systems and habitats, cultural, historical things. That's become very important now that the LUC has a person who's qualified to really know the historical and cultural issues. That's become an important vote. economic resource, protecting the economy. Can the state support this activity? In other words, if a highway is needed, who's going to pay for it? Now, the money available, just because it may be nice to have a hotel in a remote area, if there's no access to it and the state is expected to get a highway out there, it may mean that the project shouldn't be built. We want to make sure that employment opportunities are there. And finally, of course, housing, and particularly low, moderate, and gap housing. An important consideration when the LUC does its work is that it must consider the county's general plan. That's the next step down in the process. Well, here's a look at what South Maui now has as its land use districts. One thing missing on this is the high school, which is located in this general area here. But you can see the R&T Park, which recently got an expansion, a large expansion. And even though much of the land in the R&T Park had not yet been developed, the R&T Park was able to get a sizable expansion on their property, and it's been now several years. Another big one that I want to mention is down here at Mckenna on the right. Mckenna Resort in 1974 was able to get the urban designation. I was involved in the LUC hearings back then. This is now 46 years ago, and environmental documents were written up and everything else. They got that, and as we know, very little was done with that large tract of land. And still, very little has been done. The hotel was torn down recently, some smaller units being put up, but the potential for a lot of development is there. Similarly with Wailea 670, a large tract of land that was made urban, but nothing has been put on that land, even though it's decades later. The two areas in lighter color, Maui Meadows up here and this one in North Kihei, are both rural. But as you can see, all the lands Makai of the highway, south below the highway, are almost all urban, with very little above the highway in urban classification. And that's the present situation with the land use districts. We're going to see how that interacts with the community plan, etc. Some of the problems that I see with the LUC, and Jonathan, I'm sure will want to comment on this. There's only one LUC commissioner for Maui, so there could be more than one. One of the statewide ones could be, but often that isn't the case. So the LUC is making important decisions about our island when there may be only one commissioner on the commission from that island. And that means that they're, of course, looking at statewide concerns, probably more than they are necessarily about the concerns of that island or even of the community where the project is. The LUC lacks enforcement powers. They review the projects and the conditions they put on them, but enforcement power they don't have. That's left up to the county to do. And it's not always been exercised to the degree that it probably should be. There seems to be no time limit for LUC entitlements. I mentioned Mckenna and Wailea 670, even though they were decades old. In the case of Mckenna, 46 years ago, and the situation may change, traffic may change, etc. Somehow the entitlements are never taken away from them. So it's a huge gift to a landowner to have that, and they buy it and they can sell the land and make money off of it. Developer has years to prepare their application in the process of getting approval for a change, but the community and public may have very short time. So the developer has been preparing their environmental documents, their application, everything. It goes to the LUC, and then all of a sudden it appears on the agenda, and the public has to scurry very fast to be able to give testimony in favor or opposing that particular project. And finally, in the past, the county planning department did not properly support the county's own general plan. The conditions have been put down, or sometimes in the application process, the county gave testimony for the LUC and didn't always support their own general plan, something they should have done. That's not a fault of the LUC. It's really a fault in the past of the county planning department. Now, taking a look at the general plan, because that's what really begins implementing what happens on the urban land or rural land, has three levels. The countywide policy plan, which are basic nice statements, motherhood and apple pie type statements about all the good things that should be done in the county. The Maui Island plan, which provides the growth boundaries where things should be taking place on the island. And finally, the more detailed community plans. They all make up the general plan, and the LUC should be paying attention to all of that as they go through their approval process. When it comes to the let's see here, comes to the Maui Island plan, these are the growth boundaries for North Kihei. And as you can see, at present, this is where the high school is, all the way up above that has now been designated as a potential growth boundary, so that when the community in the next year or two develops its South Maui community plan, they will be looking, should development be taking place in that Mauka area above the highway. And if they think it should be, I'm sure the owners of that land, and I'll talk about those in a minute, will go to the LUC and say, we want to redesignate our land to be urbanized, and so we can put developments up there, whatever development they think would be appropriate. And then you get the next area down, south, where are we here? In South Maui, in Wailea, Mckenna, you can see the areas there that have all been put within the growth boundaries. So those are the limits. And the reason for growth boundaries is we don't want development taking place everywhere. Public costs would be too high. This allows us to keep costs down a bit by doing it, by keeping things consolidated in reduced areas. Then you get the community plan, and we have 6 community plan districts on Maui Island. The South Maui one goes all the way from Mckenna there in the south, all the way around Kailua Pond, all the way to Malaya. And that's what you'll be working with in the next several months and year ahead. This is the old community plan, the one you've been working with since 1998. You can see there all the little boxes there which designate different types of uses. More recently, the county has now taken that map and done a nice updating of it, putting it all in nice color. It's all on the web, and that's what the county will be working with, and you'll be looking at that in the future. And as I said, this big area up here has the potential, it's in the growth boundary, and it could eventually be put in some kind of development. It's not yet in the state land use urban district, but it certainly could be if the owners want to do that. Taking a closer look at that, there's North Kihei, and here's South Kihei. Mckenna is a very large resort that's massive, 1,700 acres up here, a very, very large area that also will be going through changes in the near future. Now, important consideration is who owns the land in these areas. And, oh, 1 second, too fast. Let's go back up. Okay, these are the major South Maui landowners, and I think people in South Maui should be very well aware of who owns the Mauka lands in Kihei. Here are all the residential units in Wailea, but Mauka of the highway, Haleakala Ranch owns this large parcel, as well as this area around the R&T Park, and over here on this side up here, they own a lot of land. This is the Hawaiian Homelands up in, that you get access to from Kula. Ulapalakua down here in the south owns lots of land. The question will be in the next years ahead, what will these big ranches want to do with all their land? Right now, they're not earning money off it, and you can be sure they're going to want to come to you. When the General Plan Advisory Committee was putting together the Maui Island Plan, they got a proposal from Haleakala Ranch and Kanaolu Ranch, Haleakala Ranch here, that was to put up a lot of development in that area. These are some of the proposals they came to the general plan. This is in 2007, 2008. Kanaolu Ranch wanted to put in 539 acres of development, 1,700 units up there. Haleakala Ranch came in with 1,100, almost 1,200 acres and wanted to put 2,600. My guess is that when you go through the Kihei Community Plan, you're going to see these two ranches and maybe even Ulapalakua coming to you saying, we want development on our Mauka land. The problem is, what about roads? What about access to schools? Will new schools have to be built? You had so much trouble getting the high school built. Will there be enough funds to build another high school for all these families? And you also have a very large project that has already gotten its entitlement, and that's the Kihei Research and Technology Park. This is something the LUC did approve previously. I got to drink a little water here. Hold on. And you can see here they got 2 million square feet of development that they're allowed, 1,200 units. At some point, they're going to want to monetize that and begin the development of that area. And there's going to be a need for a lot of highways up here and roads up here if any of that development were to take place, and there's no money available to build those roads. So there will be big considerations for the LUC, whether they should urbanize any of those large MoCA areas, because Pilani Highway will not be able to carry the traffic. It's already at a reduced speed. Mckenna is another one, which will be going through its general plan and EIS documents. Again, they're going to have to update all those things, and we'll have to see where they end up and what they propose for their development. So the question that South Maui has to answer, and I'm near the end here, who will decide South Maui's future? Will landowners and developers control South Maui's future? Or will residents and your community associations take the lead? Where will the weight come down as the Kihei Community Plan is put together over the next 2 years? And to what degree will you be aware of what the LUC would approve and not approve, particularly on all those MoCA areas? That's going to be a major decision that will influence your future in the decades to come. The community plans are supposed to be 20-year plans, and they go through the community's advisory, then they go to the planning commission, and then they go to the council for final adoption. And then it'll be up to the LUC to make decisions implementing a lot of those decisions. So the shape of South Maui's future over the next 2 years, your South Maui community will be developing a new Kihei Mckenna community plan. And it's beginning right now. Down at the bottom there, there's a website where you can go in, can sign up to get newsletters, be involved, and hopefully, if you're interested in your future, in the future of your community, you will go to the county website and get onto the advisory committee for the South Maui Community Plan. And it'll be a lot of work for about 9 months, but in the end, you may have a product that you like, and you may stop bad things from happening. And with that, I'll try to go back to my, and I want to thank you for listening, and I'll send it over to Mark Hyde, or first Mike and then Mark.
Thank you very much, Dick. Very, very informative. You haven't lost your touch as a professor, believe me. You're
Thank
educating. And I will say that, Mark is up next, and we want to do that, but I certainly want to give Jonathan the opportunity after that to address, and he wants, and Dick mentioned that, into what Dick offered on the LUC. And anybody from Maui, ears perk up. Oh, you only got one guy. How come you only have one? What could you have more? But whatever Jonathan wants to address on that, we want to give him the opportunity. Okay, so we'll turn to Mark Hyde. As I said, he's a past vice president of KCA and a long-term member, and very active in our community. So Mark, you're up. Would you take it away, please?
Yes, thanks, Mike. First, I should say that I am the president of South Maui Citizens for Responsible Growth, which is a nonprofit organization that was a litigant in the Mega Mall case, which was concluded last summer. But I want to point out that my comments tonight are my own only and not of others. And Mike has given me a pretty broad range to address you on the topic of the value of the LUC to our South Maui community, which I'm going to do in part by comparing and contrasting it with Maui County's planning apparatus, and use the experience in the Mega Mall case as a touchstone for making the case for the value of the LUC. And in doing that, I'm going to get into the weeds. So you may find me perhaps a little bit of field here and there, but in the end, there is a theme here, and that is that the LUC has great value to our community. Some of the words and phrases that come to my mind that are characteristic of the LUC are, number one, that it's fair, it respects the rule of law, It listens to the community, which is, I think, going to become even more challenging in the future for us for a variety of reasons, some of which I'll get into. It shows respect for the people that come before it. And it's unafraid to do difficult things, even when opposed by powerful interests, as evidenced by its conditioning of the Kihei High School land use reclassification on construction of what may be an expensive overpass or underpass to promote public safety in our community, which is we highly value. I've also seen it be extremely sensitive to Hawaiian cultural concerns. And as Jonathan was saying, it's composed of very highly qualified commissioners. And as also he pointed out, who are largely removed from political considerations because of the fact that it is a statewide organization or agency, and therefore the commissioners aren't necessarily embedded in our community, which in some ways is a good thing. 4 commissioners are required to come from 4 counties of the state. The remainder are appointed at large. But additive to that is that the backgrounds and experience of those who have served on the commission of late do not concentrate in the areas of development, real estate, and trade unions, which I believe contributes to its ability to make fair decisions about land use development. And I'm going to contrast this briefly with Maui County's Planning Commission, which is a kind of a local version of the LUC, where the commissioners are necessarily Maui County residents. But historically, a significant number of local commissioners have come from development, construction, and real estate interests affected either directly or indirectly by the decisions they make, which can, at a minimum, create the appearance of bias in favor of development and the potential for real development bias as well, which is why many communities have policies in place supporting diversity in planning commission appointment to get at that very concern. Now, I know it's difficult to find citizens willing to seek appointment to the local planning commission because the work that it does, like the work of the LUC, can be very technical and the workload is significant, which is likely why many candidates for appointment do come from interests directly affected by commission decisions, that is at the local level, which provides a reason to apply for appointment beyond public service alone. But the point I want to make is that balanced, less politically and special interest influenced planning bodies like the LUC are well positioned to produce good planning decisions and outcomes for our communities. Commissions and local government agencies with bias are not. For an obvious example of how awry things can get, consider the Mega Mall case where our local government collaborated with developers in the furtherance of an unauthorized development that not only violated the LUC's 1995 order as it found in 2012-13, it violated our community plan and it shoved aside sound policies contained in the countywide policy plan, doing so in the dark without any public input, only to be stopped when the LUC interceded to shut down the impending planning and development, I'll call it a disaster, which had the project been built, would have significantly and negatively affected the whole of South Maui, given the size of the project, the kind of the project, and where it was located. This threat to community voice that can happen when you have politics and bias getting in the way is not limited to our agencies. There are some other trends that I want to point out that I think we need to be cognizant of and be vigilant about. And one is that in the old days, if you will, which weren't that long ago, landowners and development were largely in the hands of local people and local families. That's changing. Now we're seeing large developments in the hands of out-of-state developers, out-of-state money, Wall Street, and so forth. And to show, I think, how that can affect decision-making, in a recent conversation with our South Maui Council Representative Kelly King, who has spoken to the developer of the Mega Mall project subsequent to the dismissal of the case, she was told that they don't want to meet with the community to share their plans for the land, which is particularly worrisome because the developer's last representation to the LUC was that while they are committed to developing the land as represented by the ranch to the commission 26 years ago, they don't believe there's a market for the approved 123 lot light industrial park. Now, I have never in my life heard a developer commit to building a gigantic project in the solid belief that it's doomed to failure. So should we really expect a smooth glide path forward toward the development of a gigantic, useless flop in the middle of our community? Or will this be a continuing game of whack-a-mole and catch me if you can between the developer and the community? Time will tell. At the same time, while the developer is saying, I'm going to build the land as represented into a 123 lot light industrial park, the community wants to see an entirely different and needs-based use of the land for housing, while cultural descendants want to see particular parts of the property set aside for cultural practice that's consistent with public policies contained in the 2010 adopted countywide policy plan, calling for perpetuation of the Hawaiian culture as a vital force in the lives of residents, with specific objectives such as to protect and preserve access to mountain, ocean, and island resources for traditional Hawaiian cultural practices. Now, of course, when the light industrial park was vetted by the Land Use Commission in 26 years ago, that policy wasn't in effect. Times have changed, but the original authorization remains. So the community is left anxiously to wonder what will really happen to this large prime parcel of real property located in the middle of our community. And the LUC's role may not be over should the developer and the county stray once again. I'll touch just briefly on another trend that is going to challenge and does challenge local voice, and that is out-of-state funding of our local elections in an attempt to take control of our legislative council to impact the way it views land use. I'll give you one key example of that, and that is the National Association of Realtors, headquartered in Chicago, Illinois, donating $60,000 to boost the Molokai Council seat candidacy of Stacy Crivello. Now, do you believe it did so because it cares deeply and emotionally about the good people of Molokai? Or do you sense a different motive having to do with shaping land use policy and development in Maui County? And that's in addition to over $100,000 in dark money managed by an out-of-state consultant in an attempt to effect and elect other pro-development candidates and to defeat all 7 citizen-initiated proposed charter changes. One of those was, of course, to restructure county government to provide for more professionalism in the administration of day-to-day activities, which unfortunately was defeated and left in place a local power structure which can result in the politicization of land use decisions and the mischief that can go on with small town politics. Now, of course, every county administration is different. So the fact that our structure is open to mischief doesn't mean that it'll necessarily occur. And in that vein, I want to disassociate the county's current planning director from what occurred during the Arakawa administration. I've had brief conversation with her and communication. It's important to get into this because people want to know, well, what's going to happen to the property? Well, because the Mega Mall case has been dismissed, it's now in the hands of the county planning director by statute to ensure that state law is enforced as articulated by the LUC in its orders. Fortunately, unlike the prior planning director, she understands it's her duty to enforce the order. She also knows that our community plan specifically speaks to how the 88-acre parcel of land is to be developed and has expressed respect for the plan, unlike her predecessor, who viewed the plan as something aspirational and to guide zoning only. She's also aware that the representations made by the ranch to the LUC were in support of a light industrial development and not a retail shopping center or housing complex. So far, so good, but as you know, administrations can and do change. And with each change comes a new mayor with different campaign backers and funders, often followed by newly appointed departmental directors, all with different motivations and centers of gravity that characterize the political nature of our local government. Now, circling back to the LUC and its role in serving the voice of the people and providing a fair forum for resolving disputes. Had it not stepped in 2012 and responded positively to the application by the community to review what was going on in the land versus what was ordered back in 1995, had they not done that, today we would be suffering from the negative, unassessed effects arising from the Rogue Mega Mall and the Honua-Ula projects. I mean, consider this. We'd have to endure significant amounts of vehicle traffic generated by the retail and housing complexes compared to that associated with light industrial use, which typically occurs during normal commute hours and in relatively low volume. Second, a key element of our community plan calling for retail and commercial development to occur on the Mackay side of Pi'ilani Highway to address existing and known sprawl would have been completely destroyed. And third, just from a visual point of view, we'd all be greeted by acres of asphalt parking lots fronting the project every time we drove by the site. And this is just to name a few. Which brings me to dig a bit deeper into the history of the Mega Mall case again, to showcase the value that the LUC provides and provided us in that case with a fair venue for justice for the community, if you will. When the LUC approved the ranch's plan in 1995, shortly thereafter, the ranch secured under one of the ordered conditions, zoning for the property and a community plan amendment. And that community plan amendment is the same as the one in the plan today. Then early in the next decade, it signaled to the LUC that it was having difficulty finding a developer for the property and indicated shortly after that it was going to put the property up for sale, which it did. And in 2005, 10 years after the order was issued, the land was sold to an outfit named Maui Industrial Partners. And at this very point, Maui Industrial Partners went dark. And by that I mean that although the owner of the land, the ranch, was ordered to file annual reports and its successors as well, Maui Industrial Partners stopped filing reports It hired a former Maui County Public Works Director as its manager and immediately began marketing the property for sale for retail and other use, while simultaneously beginning to work with the County of Maui for a 4 large lot subdivision in support of retail development, which the county approved in 2009, even though the 1995 LUC order permitting a 123 lot light industrial park had been recorded against the property in 1995. It was a matter of public record. Nonetheless, immediately upon receiving approval for the 4 large lot subdivision, one of these lots was sold off to Honua for development of 250 affordable housing units associated with the larger Wailea 670 project and having nothing to do with light industry. And after that, the 3 remaining parcels were sold to Pi'ilani North for development of a retail outlet mall, and the other 2 sold to Pi'ilani South for development of a big box style retail complex. None of this was reported to the LUC, and none of this was made public to us. And as many of you know who have followed this saga, the community only learned of the development through a January 2012 front page article in the Maui News, which was followed the next month by a standing room only KCA meeting, thank you KCA, during which the county planning director and our then elected South Maui Council representative, Don Couch, told us that the mega mall project was fully entitled. There was nothing we could do about it, and chided the audience for not speaking up when we had the chance, all of which we know now was false. So at this point, the LUC stepped in, and without it, the developers in the county, quite frankly, would have succeeded, which would have amounted, to my way of thinking, to a colossal failure of our state and county planning schemes, to the detriment of the community, but to the benefit of out-of-state development money and presumably short-term political gain. Okay, so now I'm going to conclude, but like Dick, I have a few suggestions for the LUC as well. First, to avoid a situation where it is blind to the non-filing, if you will, of annual reports, it needs to have a tickler system to make sure that it's on top of the things like that. That's a simple one. Second, I'd like to see, as Dick mentioned, time limits added to land reclassification orders to avoid future mega mall cases. Since the approved land use or light industrial park was essentially dead, with not one shovel full of dirt having been moved in 2005, that would have been, to me, an ideal time for a review with the landowner forced to come back and show cause why the order should not be defeased, if you will, and the land reverted to ag. Third, I'd like to see the LUC be more courageous in exercising its power to revert the land to a former use in the face of failure of a petitioner or successor in interest, as was the case here, to develop land in substantial compliance with the representations made to the LUC and where no substantial development consistent with what had been approved has occurred. And at the risk of appearing to crab a little bit about the contested case, I think it would have been totally appropriate for the LUC to have reverted the property back to ag in 2013, once the commission found that the owners had failed to develop the property in compliance with the representations made by the ranch, because there had been absolutely no development at that point, which is 18 years after the greenlighting of the project. And finally, and I'll conclude, I think it would be very useful to empower the LUC to award attorneys' fees and costs to citizen groups who are successful in challenging developers like that with the mega mall, who violate LUC orders in the face of county planning directors who failed to do so. And mahalo, Mike, for giving me this opportunity this evening to address the KCA.
All right, right back at you, Mark. I want to point out a few things. I find it kind of interesting that everybody here is a volunteer. Nobody is getting paid. Nobody is a bureaucrat. These are all volunteers devoting their time as they do in so many other instances. So it's a group of community members trying to better things for the community. And I did want to give Jonathan the opportunity to address anything he wants about the LUC. But I would like to remind folks a few things. Number one, Jonathan is one of generally 9 or maybe 8 people. So it's not like Jonathan was making these decisions because he's the chair, no more than I make decisions for KCA because I'm the president. Sometimes we get stuck with things, Jonathan, and then we get the blame for things. It's like, gee, we're only volunteers. So, what decisions were made by the LUC were made by the commission, not by Jonathan. And he doesn't establish things. He tries to get things done, organizing. So whatever may be called criticisms of the LUC or hard questions, Jonathan can address them as best he can. But he's not the executive director or anything like that. He is a volunteer trying to run the meetings. So, Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you. Anything you would like to comment on?
Let me make one comment first before Jonathan gets on, and that is the LUC today, as it's constituted over the last few years, has worked 100 times better than it did decades ago. It's a better group of people on there, better questioning, better looking at the issues. So any critique I think Mark or I gave has to be taken in the context that it's much, much better than it ever was in the past. And that doesn't mean anything can't be improved, but well done.
Okay, Jonathan, now you got to
Thanks for the floor, but I do look forward to a conversation and also hearing from any Facebook comments or questions though. But I have to say that true to form, Dick and Mark have given me a lot of fodder to react to. Excellent comments and questions. I guess this might not be in the most articulate set of order, but one thing about being a volunteer is, of course, you get what you pay for, right? So people who are frustrated with us, it's like, well, we are volunteers. In no particular order, other than the ones that I happen to write down some of the comments from Dick and Mark on. The issue of reversion is related to the issue of enforcement. So the Land Use Commission has the power to enforce the conditions that we place on property, but only until such time that substantial commencement of the development has occurred. So, and that has been interpreted by the courts in a particular way in one case on Hawaii Island. But basically, if there's been land altering activity, if there's been a lot of investment and change in actually building the project, at that point, the LUC under the current law no longer has any ability to enforce conditions, and it's all up to the counties. Sometimes the counties like to enforce our conditions, sometimes they don't. I do believe that one of the best things that could be done to improve the LUC's law is to broaden our enforcement powers beyond that threshold, as well as right now we have one tool. We can revert. So it's as if the penalty for jaywalking or the penalty for speeding 50 miles over the speed limit or the penalty for grievously injuring somebody was all the same penalty, right? Life in prison. We have revert the property to its former designation for the smallest or the largest failure to comply with conditions. I'd like us to have a little more flexibility in that so that there's sometimes reversion is not necessarily the best thing. We want to see a good project move forward, but we want to see it move forward and not just dragged out. And if we had fining ability or other things that we might be able to encourage the landowners to move there. I'm sure we could be more aggressive at reversion. I will say that in my time with the Land Use Commission, we reverted the Waikoloa Highlands project on Hawaii Island, and we reverted the Sterling Kim's project in Wailuku. I was not familiar. It might have happened before under the LUC, but I don't think the LUC has done much reversion. So yes, we could be more aggressive on it. I think we've been more aggressive than previous incarnations of the LUC. The idea of being able to award attorney's fees is an interesting one. I don't know if the private attorney general's doctrine, which is in state law, normally that's done by the courts, not by a quasi-judicial commission. But it's an interesting idea. And then I want to talk about Dick's comment about, there's only sometimes one member from Maui or one member from Hawaii Island, and Hawaii is like huge, and there's East Hawaii and West Hawaii, or one member from Kauai. I get it. It seems very unjust. But to Mark's point, we are insulated. And actually the biggest way that we're insulated is that zoning decisions at the county level and the local governmental level, even though there's planning commissions, zoning decisions are ultimately made by council members, and you can donate to their campaigns. And I'm not saying that any of them are crooked or they do it, but people are influenced by donations. You can't donate to my campaign. I didn't have a campaign. I'm not an elected official. So by being a little bit insulated from the process, we do have an ability to step back from certain pressures that might exist. Could we have more members from each county? Perhaps. 9 seems to be, in my experience, this is not a word, but I'm going to use it, wieldy as opposed to unwieldy. It's a wieldy group. We have a nice diversity of opinions, but it's not so large that it's hard to actually get business done. And I guess the last thing I'll say, and before I sort of stop talking on this bit, I think the best decisions when it comes to policy and government are sort of like there's layers of the onion. There's some decisions that should totally be made just at the local level. There's other decisions that should be influenced by these outer layers. The outer layers shouldn't control everything, but there should be these different layers that inform each other. And when it works well, I have a friend on Hawaii Island who is fond of saying, home rule is only as good as the home rulers are. Sometimes you have the council that's not acting the way that you want them to, or the planning department that's not acting the way that you want them to, or the water department that's not acting the way that you want them to. And in those cases, it's kind of good that there's people who are insulated from what you're doing. Sometimes it's the reverse. Your local folks are great and the statewide people are not who you want. The diversity and the different layers, I think, do at least add for some opportunities to look at decisions at different levels with different eyes and get to better decisions. That'd just be my response to Dick's point and Mark's comments on it. But I don't know if there's questions, or Mike, what do you want to do next?
Well, I'd like to go back to Mark or Dick and see if they want to follow up on what you addressed. You addressed some of the things they asked. So Mark or Dick, do you have anything else you want to voice?
Yeah, I want to give an example of a very good decision that I think was made by the LUC, and that was with regard to Oluwalu. About 3 or 4 years ago, it was a very contentious issue. Lots of people got involved in it. Long hearings, very difficult hearings were held. And it was really a coming together of community people. The planning department came in, experts on both sides came in. And in the end, the LUC struggled with it and voted that it was not ripe to reclassify the lands in Oluwalu into an urban area. And it ended up that way. And I think it was a good, and so in other words, 20 years ago, that would have been a no-brainer. Any application like that would have automatically been approved without much discussion. So that's why when I made the comment that I think things have gotten better, that was one that was done with historical and cultural issues looked at, traffic looked at, all the issues involved. And I think the right decision was made.
Thanks, Dick. Mark, you have anything?
No, I don't, Mike. I do. I'm glad that Jonathan was tickled with the idea of the kind of a private attorney general theory, because it's very, very expensive and time consuming, as you pointed out, Mike, for citizens to take on this laboring oar to do the right thing when local government doesn't. And some people just won't be able to mount that kind of an effort. And it shouldn't be up to the people. And litigation can oppress people. I'll just leave it at that. So it would take some legislation, I think, but I think would be worthwhile for the commission to have that power.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I would ask, I think Jonathan would probably be the one, but anybody who wants to comment on it. Mark did a lot of it, and Dick did too, in comparing what we do on the county level as opposed to what's being done on the state level. We're looking at the Maui Planning Commission as opposed to the LUC. But the Maui Planning Commission, by some people's opinion, simply reflects what the planning department decides. The planning department makes a recommendation, and it seems to many of us, also it seems to me, that most times that's what happens. The volunteers just parrot what the department says, and we know what the structure is. You have a department director who is appointed at the pleasure of the mayor. So it's kind of like it's rolling downhill. So I think many of us, certainly me, don't have the real understanding on a state level. I believe we have an OP, Office of Planning, on the state level. And without asking you, Jonathan, to put yourself on the line, what do you see, if this is a fair question, your relationship with the LUC and OP?
So the OP is, so most of all of the LUC's procedures we do are what are called quasi-judicial procedures under Chapter 91. So they're quasi-judicial hearings. We swear people in. People are usually represented by counsel. They introduce evidence. They call in witnesses. They're cross-examined. We make a decision, and then we issue finding of fact, conclusions of law, and decision in order. There's for every proceeding in front of us, there's whoever the petitioner is, there's the county government involved, and the Office of Planning is involved. The Office of Planning tries to take, from a state agency's perspective, a strong view over whether it's in compliance with state policies, as well as with sort of the public trust, interest, and resources. So they've played a really critical role in front of the LUC over the years. I think actually, if thinking back to the Oluwalu case, which we actually didn't vote on the substance of should we develop Oluwalu or not, we actually voted to reject the EIS as inadequate. And one of the turning points during that hearing was when the Office of Planning came forward and they said, we don't think this EIS is adequate. We don't think that they've met their burden under 343. So they play a very influential role, and it's a different role than the planning department does at the county level. This is sort of apropos to the question, but I realized it was something I just wanted to throw in there. I served 2 years under Governor Abercrombie and 6 under Governor Ige. I've never once gotten a call saying you need to vote this way, or I really hope you would consider this way. I think that at the county level, from what I've heard, and I'm not talking about Maui County in particular, but there is a little bit more pressure or expectation exerted in certain cases. At least in my experience with these 2 governors, it was like, no, my job was done when I appointed you, and I'm going to trust you to do the job that you're set to do. So that might be, I haven't served at the county level, but that I've been told that might be a little bit different in the way the 2 levels operate.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's most helpful. Dick, I'm going to try and get to questions. So
okay, please.
You're up, but try and keep it brief.
Just to put a framework on things, when a developer goes ahead and tries to get a land use change, or for that matter, a community plan change or zoning change, they can make millions of dollars if it gets approved. In other words, they go ahead and they do their studies, and let's say it even costs them $1 million to eventually go through the whole process and get all the entitlements that they need. But then they can make 10, 20, 30, $50 million as a result of having gotten that entitlement. And that's why it's so, what Mark was saying about the cost for the community, we have to put up the funds ourselves if we really want to challenge it. And there's no return to us other than the fact that our community might be better. So the financial element of all this land use planning is really important to consider, that the community is at a disadvantage in not having the funds to challenge what might be an inappropriate land use decision. And this is at any level.
Thank you, Dick. I'll try. Many of the questions that are coming in are on the current topic. So, Jonathan, I'll put this to you. Could you explain how the issue of a off-grade crossing for the high school came about? I mean, there's been many questions about what's the LUC's position on it. How can people influence the LUC on it? You know, those type of questions, which is good because many of the people don't have the understanding of what happened, and that's what kind of spurred us to think of the LUC. So that's the hot button issue right now. We've addressed a lot of the general history of it, but could you explain how that came about and where the LUC is on it?
And I'm going to sort of answer another question that I see in the chat, which is about, can you talk to LUC members about what's in front of them during a proceeding outside of the formal testimony? So I'm going to use that second question as a preface to the first.
Perfect.
I mentioned that our proceedings are quasi-judicial, meaning we sort of sit as judges. And just the same way that you don't want a judge talking on the golf course with one of the parties to a proceeding about the case that's in front of them, that's called an ex parte communication. You generally don't want to have the LUC members talking about something on an active proceeding in front of them with somebody who has a vested interest in the outcome of that decision. And so we avoid and are required to avoid those kinds of conversations. So back in the physical world that we used to inhabit till last March, and we will hopefully inhabit again, it was sometimes awkward outside the hearing room. You know, I'd see Dick, who I've known for years. He's like, "Hey, Jonathan, I'm like, "No, Dick." And he's like, no, I know the thing. I'm talking about something. Okay, that's fine. You know, sometimes people who don't know and they want to talk to you about it, and you just got to say, listen, I got to hear from you during public testimony so that all the parties hear what you have to say and they don't think that I'm getting some special sort of information that is not privy to all the other parties in the decision. That said, I can recite what's actually, the LUC has a really good website that the staff does a good job of updating. So you can get it's not the most intuitive to navigate, but it's pretty good. You can get a sense of where we are at on the overpass underpass issue. The short version is that when and I wasn't on the LUC during the first decision, when the land was moved to the agricultural district to the urban district, one of the requirements was that before the opening of the first phase of the high school, there would be either an overpass or an underpass constructed. I'm going to short circuit some of the history because it got a little complex recently. Basically, we heard that the DOE was going to ask for a change to that motion. Then they kind of went away. Then we started to hear that they weren't going to build the overpass or underpass before phase one. Councilmember King requested via letter a status report from the DOE. So I mentioned that was one of the 6 things we did. We asked for the DOE for a status report. They came and they said, you know what? Yeah, we're not going to do it before phase one. We don't think we have to under your condition. In response to that, the county council passed a resolution asking us to hold a hearing on the issue. So the Corp Counsel's office filed a motion in front of us saying, to summarize, when you said build an overpass or underpass before phase one, did you mean build an overpass or an underpass before phase one? And we said, yeah, actually, that's kind of what we meant when we said that. So we ruled that that's indeed what we meant. I believe then the county said, well, we're not going to issue, if you're non-compliance, since we're in charge of enforcement now, that there's been substantial commencement, we won't issue an occupancy permit unless you comply with this condition. Since then, the Department of Education has come to us with a proposal for a motion to change that condition again. And where we left off last was that the Land Use Commission unanimously said, we're not going to consider your motion at this time, when we actually asked a series of questions of the Department of Education to respond to us in writing, and not to come back until they had responded to us in writing. As of now, we have not heard anything more from the Department of Education. So they are certainly entitled to, as the petitioner, to come to us with a proposed motion to change things. But right now, that's where things stand.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's most helpful coming from you. And, there's a lot of confusion in the community. I have so many people say, well, the LUC decided that they had to put in a roundabout. No, it has nothing to do with that decision. If the state DOT says, we're going to put a roundabout in instead of a signalized intersection, because after decades of saying roundabouts are terrible, we now say they're the best thing ever, but that has nothing to do with the condition. So if you replace a signalized intersection with a roundabout, the KCA thinks that's terrific. They're safer, there's a lot of advantages, but that doesn't replace this condition, and it really doesn't have much effect, in our opinion, on it. And hearing state bureaucrats, maybe is the term, saying, oh yeah, well now you don't need that. Well, no, you've got to go back to the LUC, as you said, Jonathan, and convince them of that. And most recently, one of the things that many of the commissioners had said to the Department of Education, have you met with the community? And, they gave some kind of vague answers. Well, they did talk to the KCA, and was an email in here. Well, they did finally have a public meeting, virtual public meeting this month, which we felt was a kind of a checkoff point. Okay, now we can go back to the LUC, and we had a meeting, and we say that because I think I can say that every question that we asked the DOE, the community asked, not only KCA, about the school, they had no answers. Oh, we'll have to get back to you on that. So it was really like a disguised meeting to let the Department of Transportation address their point of view, and there was no answers about the school. So we found that kind of curious. But
Mike, I've put into the chat within the Zoom meeting the link to the letter, and so hopefully maybe Andrew can, or somebody else can drop that back into the Facebook chat, and that'll take you directly to the Land Use Commission's letter of November 10th that we sent to the Deputy AG for the Department of Education with our questions. And if you go to the LUC website, it's pretty easy. You go to pending dockets, you go to motions, and then you go down at the very bottom, and there's something called Kihei High School DOE DOT motion for traffic infrastructure, and all of the documents and filings are there.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's most helpful to give folks a link that they can go to, because as a Luddite, I can say that is a pretty easy website. There's a lot of material on it, and it has to be, but I can find things. If I can find things, I think most anyone else can. I forgot that you guys could see the chat as well. That's why I was trying to keep up with some of the questions. And some of the questions are really tough because you don't know what they're addressing. At one point, somebody said something in the panel, and they ask like, what does that mean? Well, what mean? It's kind of tough. Plus, I'm pretty slow at trying to read this and listen and talk at the same time. And we're coming to the end, but as I said, we have free reign at all these volunteers. As long as they're willing to participate, we can go a little bit longer. So do any of you, three of you, have anything else you'd like to add or kind of wrap up with?
Yeah, I would like to just reinforce what I said earlier, that I would hope that members of your community get involved in the community plan process for South Maui. hope the KCA will be holding some meetings in the near future on the Mckenna Community Plan update. It's important and get involved in it. It's a great experience for volunteers who really want to get involved in their community and in the future of their community. And you can contact the county planning department. There's a great website that they have now, We Are Maui. It's called one word, We Are Maui. And go there and get links to the South Maui community plan process.
Thank you, Dick. And I have to jump in before I ask you to answer that next question from Clark. It just so happens our next KCA meeting in March will be on that very topic, on the upcoming community plan. So we are KCA Mauka and KCA Mackay are right in sync on that topic. That is March 16th. So that question from Clark Leslie, the LUC votes, are the residents allowed to vote on how the land is used? I think that was kind of addressed before, but Jonathan, could you explain that?
So if I understand the question correctly, which is entirely possible, I don't. There are some areas of the US, and I don't know about other countries, where zoning can actually be done by initiative, by voter initiative, by direct voter control. It's not done that way in Hawaii. And so you can't have a landowner get essentially a petition on the ballot to say, we want this to go into the area where everybody gets to vote on it. The role that voters have is multiple. It's in electing the governor who appoints members of the Land Use Commission. It's in participating in the confirmation process of proposed members of the Land Use Commission and other boards and commissions. It's also in the county's roles, and we listen to the counties a tremendous amount when they appear in front of the Land Use Commission. They're always a necessary party for anything in that particular county. So the role you have in electing your council members and your mayor, and commenting in the confirmation process of your planning commission members is all a very significant role, but it's not like a yes or no, we want X to be zoned for this, or we want Y to be zoned for that. So I don't know, hopefully that's somewhat responsive to Clark's question.
Yeah, I think it is, Jonathan, and I would add that's what public testimony is for. And you can testify at a meeting, in person, well, I guess virtual now, and you can submit written testimony. And I'll say for KCA, we have always found the LUC very receptive to listening to the testimony. It doesn't mean if you say this, oh, well, if you guys want it, sure, we'll do that. But they're listening, they're asking questions, they're asking why you have that position. So we feel that's a very valuable way to influence the situation. You don't have a vote, unless you want to devote a good part of your life to being a commissioner and getting there. But as a testifier, you certainly can have influence.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll make this the last question because, yes, I don't want to overextend. I'm getting hungry. I don't know about other guys. Question from Julie Williams. If there really is consideration going on about putting a roundabout on a state highway, is there any way the community can get involved to stop it? Well, from KCA's point of view, we wouldn't want it stopped. We've been advocating for roundabouts for years. And if you do research, you'll find that most, I won't say all, but most professional traffic engineers have said there's so many reasons why the roundabout is favorable to the signalized intersection, primarily with safety. I mean, just very quick summation is cars have to go slower when they're going into a roundabout. If you reduce the speed and a collision occurs, there's less damage and danger.
But Mike, A roundabout is one thing if you're trying to merge traffic from, say, several directions. It's quite a different thing, though, if that's the place where you're asking students to walk back and forth across the street. Even a slower moving car is going to kill somebody. So the question is whether the roundabout is that the right place to put a roundabout where you're asking the kids to cross the street?
You know, if can I yeah, I want to maybe give a response and suggest this is perhaps a way to wrap up. You know, I believe the research I've read that shows that roundabouts, even on highways, can be really effective tools for slowing traffic and smoothly controlling traffic. But I also get, like, the first time I had to drive through one, it was like a heart-pounding experience. It totally freaked me out. So, you know, you guys are in charge of your own destiny, but maybe another KCA forum with some traffic engineers just to talk about roundabouts themselves for folks who are interested and curious about it and who aren't as far along as you are maybe in understanding how they work and how they might work on a highway might be a useful way for you to talk about some things. And then you could bring up the related but distinct issues of pedestrian safety.
Right, and I'll just mention one thing, that a roundabout of this nature does have a pedestrian signal light to stop traffic. It's not because the cars are going slower, the kids have to dodge through. There's something called the Hawk system, which is somewhat comparable to a walk pedestrian where you push the button. So it's not like the kids are going to have to cross. So a roundabout for pedestrian crossing is safer in that a car can run the Hawk light, he can run the red light, but most likely if he runs the red light, maybe I should say she too, they're going much faster. So the roundabout makes it safer. As far as making it safest, that's why we're saying the roundabout is a good step forward, but we still need the off-grade crossing. Less danger with a roundabout, no danger if the kid is walking under the highway instead of crossing. So we'll wrap it up, guys, but thank you again for devoting your volunteer time. Thank you for the community for participating. And I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, but we will have this forum shown on KCA website, and you can submit questions and you can participate. We always announce immediately when the LUC is having another meeting. And nowadays it's virtual, you don't even have to travel. So participate, participate in KCA meetings, participate in LUC meetings. But if you just sit back and don't like it, and you don't vote, you don't even register to vote, you're not going to have much of a voice. So again, thank you everyone for participating. Next meeting is on March 16th, same time, third Tuesday of the month for 61 years now. So that's locked in. So we'll say aloha and everybody get home safe now.
Thanks, Mike.
Aloha.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Thank you.